Imagine a machine built not just to move you, but to challenge what you believed a motorcycle could be. Born in an era of neon optimism and analog limits, yet daring to act like it came from tomorrow. Its heart breathed compressed air and ambition. Its body a sculpted statement of technology outrunning taste. It promised effortless acceleration, computer-assisted control, and a new kind of confidence on the open road, then vanished before most riders ever saw one in person. Decades later, the few survivors whisper of a time when innovation sprinted faster than understanding, when the dream of the future was loud, metallic, and turbocharged. This isn't just nostalgia, it's a question about how far ahead you can be before the world is ready to follow. If you love stories about machines that tried to rewrite the rules, hit like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments which forgotten legend should ride again next. The Honda CX500 Turbo arrived in 1982 as the kind of idea that only a company brimming with confidence would dare to build. Honda had already conquered nearly every corner of motorcycling, racing, touring, commuting, but the CX500 Turbo wasn't about domination. It was about experimentation, about proving that the future could be engineered rather than imagined. To understand why the CX500 Turbo mattered, you have to rewind to the late 1970s. The motorcycle world was obsessed with horsepower, and emission standards were tightening. Manufacturers faced a dilemma. How do you make engines more powerful and cleaner at the same time? Turbocharging, already taking root in the car world, looked like the magic bullet. Compress the air, feed the engine more oxygen, get more power from the same displacement. Simple on paper, wildly complex in practice. The CX500 Turbo was Honda's answer to that question, but it was also a declaration of technological identity. This wasn't a brand that chased fads, it built them. The CX platform was already unconventional. A transverse V-twin engine with liquid cooling and shaft drive, more touring than sport, formed the base. Engineers saw potential in its durability and packaging. By bolting a compact IHI turbocharger to the engine, recalibrating the fuel system with a pioneering computer-controlled injection setup, and wrapping it all in aerodynamic bodywork, Honda created something that looked and felt like a machine from another decade. And it really did. Digital gauges, self-diagnosing electronics, and angular fairings that slice through air like origami folded by science fiction artists. The intent was clear, not just speed but sophistication. This was the moment Honda wanted to prove that technology could outthink brute force. Yet the reality was more complicated. Turbo lag, an unavoidable delay between throttle input and boost, meant the CX500 Turbo could feel asleep at low speeds and explosive at mid-range. The transition was thrilling but unpredictable. Riders accustomed to smooth, carbureted power bands weren't sure what to make of it. Honda's engineers, however, were relentless in refinement. They built an entire feedback system around sensors, monitoring intake pressure, temperature, and detonation to keep the bike from tearing itself apart. It was brilliant in concept, decades ahead of its time. But the world wasn't ready for a motorcycle that thought for you. In showrooms, the CX500 Turbo was dazzling but intimidating. Its futuristic styling, while striking, didn't read as beautiful to everyone. It read as complicated. Priced higher than many leader bikes, it demanded a level of trust in technology that most riders didn't yet have. For dealers, that meant explaining not just what the bike did, but how it did it, and why it was worth it. Still, the CX500 Turbo captured imaginations. In the early 1980s, it appeared on magazine covers, in TV spots, even in the occasional sci-fi prop department. It symbolized the faith that machines could evolve past human instinct, that computers could make riding both safer and faster. Yet beneath the glossy optimism was a tension. Every futuristic detail added complexity. The sensors, the injection system, the boost control, even the fairings designed for stability. Each made sense individually, but together they built a bike that was almost too advanced to live comfortably in its era. Honda had poured millions into research and development, chasing perfection through circuitry and silicon. The engineers were proud, rightfully so, but the business side began to worry. Would this be the next great revolution, or an expensive lesson in timing? For many inside Honda, the CX500 Turbo represented both. It was the company's moonshot, a project born from the conviction that the future favored the bold. And in that conviction lay its greatest strength and its greatest vulnerability. As we move deeper into the story, the question becomes not whether the CX500 Turbo was impressive, it was, but why it struggled to survive a world that wasn't yet built for it. The stage was set for a clash between ambition and acceptance, between innovation and inertia. The future had arrived early, and no one was quite sure how to ride it. Next, we'll see what happened when that vision met the market, and how a handful of turbocharged dreams nearly redefined an entire decade of motorcycling. The Honda CX500 Turbo entered showrooms in 1982, surrounded by excitement, curiosity, and confusion in equal measure. Riders wanted to believe in the promise of a turbocharged future, but when they actually rode the CX500 Turbo, reality hit harder than the boost. The technology was brilliant, no question, but it was also expensive, unfamiliar, and at times unpredictable. Reviewers admired the engineering yet questioned the usability. The CX500 Turbo was quick once it came on boost, but until that moment, it behaved more like a well-mannered touring bike. Then around 5,000 RPM, it transformed, suddenly alive, surging forward with turbine force. It was thrilling, but also unnerving for those unaccustomed to such a sharp transition. For seasoned riders, it was a machine that demanded respect and finesse. For casual buyers, it felt overcomplicated, and that complexity was mirrored in the price tag. In 1982, the CX500 Turbo cost significantly more than conventional sport bikes with larger engines and simpler maintenance. Honda was betting that riders would pay for progress, but in a recession-era market, that was a risky assumption. Add to that the early reputation of turbo engines as temperamental and finicky, and hesitation spread fast. Within a year, dealers realized that the CX500 Turbo was a halo product that few halos could afford. Still, Honda didn't give up. The company doubled down, launching the CX650 Turbo the following year. More refined, smoother, and better balanced. But the market's patience had already faded. The entire turbo motorcycle experiment across multiple brands collapsed almost as quickly as it began. Yamaha, Kawasaki, Suzuki all had their own interpretations of forced induction, but none found sustainable success. In that short burst of turbo mania, Honda's CX500 Turbo stood as the most complete vision, yet it couldn't escape the cultural mismatch between 1980s riders and futuristic tech. The US market in particular struggled to connect. American riders tended to favor torque-rich, naturally aspirated engines, bikes with personality and predictability. The CX500 Turbo, by contrast, was a precision instrument that required a kind of mechanical empathy. You had to anticipate the lag, modulate the throttle, and trust the sensors to do their job. It wasn't rebellious or romantic, it was rational, almost clinical. And that clashed with the emotional appeal of motorcycling itself. For a brand built on reliability and logic, Honda had accidentally built a machine that felt almost too intelligent for its own good. Yet among enthusiasts, admiration grew. Technicians marveled at its engineering depth, the computer-controlled fuel injection, the sophisticated ignition maps, the integration of turbo boost sensors long before digital tuning became common. Collectors saw it as an artifact of transition, the bridge between analog simplicity and the electronic sophistication we take for granted today. Even in racing circles, the CX500 Turbo sparked curiosity. Though never campaigned officially, its technology influenced future endurance and touring concepts. In a way, the turbo craze functioned like a laboratory for the entire industry. Lessons learned from the CX500 Turbo would ripple forward into everything from throttle-by-wire systems to real-time engine diagnostics. But for all its influence, the bike's commercial failure haunted Honda. Sales numbers were low, and inventory moved slowly. Honda quietly withdrew the model, letting the turbo experiment fade into the background as other innovations, like the V4 engines and the emerging sport bike revolution, took the spotlight. Yet the CX500 Turbo never fully disappeared. It remained in the minds of engineers, the pages of technical manuals, and the garages of die-hard enthusiasts who appreciated its audacity. Decades later, collectors began revisiting it, recognizing that its technology foreshadowed nearly everything modern motorcycles would become. Electronic management systems, variable mapping, integrated sensors, all the hallmarks of today's superbikes started here. The CX500 Turbo may not have sold well, but it shifted the engineering mindset of an entire generation. It proved that computers and combustion could coexist, that intelligence could enhance performance rather than dilute it. Still, that didn't change the fact that for many riders in 1982, it was simply too far ahead. The machine's perfectionism clashed with an audience still in love with mechanical imperfection. Riders wanted something to tame, not something that tamed itself. The CX500 Turbo gave them a glimpse of tomorrow, and tomorrow was confusing. As we move to the next part of the story, we'll explore what happened after the experiment ended, how this misunderstood machine evolved from commercial disappointment to cultural icon, and why its DNA still echoes in nearly every high-tech motorcycle on the road today. The Honda CX500 Turbo may have left showrooms quietly, but its influence never stopped resonating through motorcycling's DNA. In the years following its short production run, riders and engineers began to understand what Honda had really built, a concept decades ahead of its audience. The CX500 Turbo wasn't just a motorcycle, it was a manifesto for the future. It combined forced induction, electronic fuel injection, onboard diagnostics, and a fully integrated aerodynamic shell at a time when carburetors and air cooling still ruled the streets. The few who owned one discovered that living with a CX500 Turbo was like owning a prototype from an alternate timeline. Maintenance was unique, parts were specialized, and even today, few mechanics can tune the complex fuel system correctly. Yet that challenge is part of the allure. The bike's longevity and build quality are classic Honda, overbuilt, resilient, and eerily modern in its precision. For riders willing to learn its rhythms, the CX500 Turbo delivers a sense of mechanical theater that few modern bikes replicate. Every press of the throttle carries a tiny pause, then a wave of acceleration that feels like a time capsule opening. What was once criticized as lag now feels like character, a reminder of the analog limits that gave machines personality. Collectors began to notice. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, as nostalgia for 1980s design took hold, the CX500 Turbo found new respect. Not as a failed experiment, but as a prophetic one. Enthusiasts recognized its impact on Honda's later successes, its approach to engine management, the integration of electronic control modules, and the focus on stability at high speeds. Those lessons surfaced in touring bikes, in the VFR series, and eventually in sport touring hybrids that balanced comfort with intelligence. Even more broadly, the CX500 Turbo signaled a philosophical shift for Honda. It proved that risk could be noble. That innovation sometimes required accepting short-term failure to achieve long-term mastery. Without the bruises of the Turbo era, Honda's later breakthroughs in electronic control and reliability wouldn't have come so seamlessly. Culturally, the CX500 Turbo also left a mark on the aesthetics of speed. Its sharp lines, digital displays, and space-age graphics captured a version of the future that pop culture adored, appearing in films. Concept art and design studies that linked motorcycles with the idea of technology as identity. It looked like it belonged on a movie set more than a freeway, and that image stayed with people long after the production ended. Today, surviving examples of the CX500 Turbo have become prized artifacts. Collectors hunt for original parts, and restoration forums obsess over preserving the factory-correct wiring harnesses and boost gauges. Each restored Turbo is more than a machine. It's a historical document, a record of what Honda dared to attempt when the world wasn't quite ready. And in that defiance lies the heart of its legacy. It's not just about performance metrics or production numbers. It's about ambition. The CX500 Turbo's story endures because it embodies the tension between imagination and reality. It reminds riders that progress often begins with misunderstanding, that the first step toward the future rarely looks like success. When modern superbikes boast traction control, variable engine mapping, and adaptive power delivery, they're echoing the CX500 Turbo's core philosophy, that machines can think, measure, and respond faster than human instinct. What was once seen as overcomplication is now the standard. Every digital system tracing power curves or reading oxygen sensors owes a silent debt to the lessons learned in the early 1980s on that futuristic V-twin. The CX500 Turbo didn't just predict the future, it made it inevitable. Its short life wasn't a failure. It was the prototype for the age of intelligence that defines motorcycling today. And even though it never achieved commercial success, its spirit still rides with every engineer who dares to build something the market doesn't yet understand. In the end, that's the real victory. The CX500 Turbo didn't need to dominate the sales charts to shape history. It just needed to exist. Because from that single act of defiant innovation, everything else followed. Next, we'll bring this full circle and look at what the CX500 Turbo means for today's riders and collectors, how to approach ownership, and what its story teaches about the price and the reward of being first. For today's riders and collectors, the Honda CX500 Turbo represents both an opportunity and a lesson. It's an opportunity to experience a truly unique chapter of motorcycle history, one where ambition overtook practicality, and a lesson in how innovation often travels a lonely road. Owning a CX500 Turbo in the 21st century isn't for the casual enthusiast. These bikes are rare, delicate, and expensive to maintain. Replacement parts, particularly for the electronic fuel injection system and turbo components, are scarce and often require sourcing from specialist communities. Yet those who take on the challenge say it's worth every minute. The CX500 Turbo isn't fast by modern standards, but it feels special in motion. The gentle hum of the liquid-cooled V-twin, the soft whine of the turbo spool, and the sudden mid-range surge. Each moment reminds you that you're straddling an experiment that redefined an industry. In the US, clean examples command respectable prices, though the market fluctuates. Well-kept, original condition CX500 turbos typically range in the mid-five-figure territory, depending on mileage and provenance. Restorations can cost just as much, given the complexity of the bike's systems, but enthusiasts rarely view this as a transaction. It's preservation. Each bike that survives is a tangible connection to Honda's most daring era, a mechanical monument to what happens when engineers chase possibility instead of probability. Reliability, surprisingly, isn't the weak point many expect. When properly maintained, the CX500 Turbo's engine is robust. It's the supporting technology, the sensors, wiring, and control units that require vigilance. But the community around these bikes is tight-knit and generous, with online groups sharing schematics, repair techniques, and even reproducing discontinued components. In that sense, the CX500 Turbo has transcended its commercial origins to become a collective project, part machine, part movement. For modern riders, the story of the CX500 Turbo offers perspective. Every time we marvel at seamless ride-by-wire systems, advanced traction control, or adaptive suspension, we're benefiting from the courage it took to launch a flawed genius like this one. The Turbo was never meant to blend in. It was designed to push boundaries, to show what could be done when a company refused to accept the limits of its time. And that's what makes it unforgettable. The CX500 Turbo teaches that progress isn't linear. It surges, just like that boost curve, quiet, patient, then explosive. Its legacy endures not because it was perfect, but because it was brave. Today, when technology saturates every corner of motorcycling, the CX500 Turbo stands as a reminder of when all that started, when engineers risked failure to build something the future would understand better than the present. For anyone lucky enough to own or ride one, that's the gift. The sense of touching the origin point of the modern age of motorcycling. So if you ever see a CX500 Turbo gleaming at a show or roaring down a quiet highway, know that you're looking at more than a rare collectible. You're looking at proof that imagination, once unleashed, never really disappears. It just waits for the world to catch up. And maybe that's the best part of its story, because the CX500 Turbo didn't just predict the future. It waited there for us to arrive.